So, I mean, people want to know about your, or any politician's political background, sort of personal background and political beliefs, and I'm quite interested in delving into that a bit.
Sure.
What's made you who you are? What's your background? Why did you get into politics?
I think and it may sound rather sort of trite, but a sort of burning sense of fairness, even from a child. And so I had two things going for me: this sense of what was fair and not fair, and certainly parents that really encouraged me to speak out, and I was very lucky too that along the way some very good teachers that inspired me.
So
but
the parents and family, were they sort of left-wing or unionists?
No,
or
actually,
what?
interestingly enough, not. But
Political?
very. I mean, my dad certainly had very strong political views, and would have political debates with me at the drop of a hat. In fact, within our family, people used to go, "Oh, don't get Ron started on that; he'll be going for a while." So, we certainly used to have a lot of political discussions, less so with my mother, I have to say. But both my parents really encouraged me to have a view and not to be fearful of expressing a view. And
but you don't come from a heavily political family that were involved in Labour Party for X number of decades or something? No. Okay. So how did it happen?
Well, as I say, I mean, the sense of fairness issue was a big one. And my father did have very strong values about, everybody should be treated fairly, with respect, very working class, very much. I mean, he was a Labour voter, and he would,
Was there a religious element to all this?
Not particularly. I mean, I went to Sunday school and baptised and those sort of things, but not particularly, seriously religious family, but Christian values, that sort of thing. I would say, but. And then through school, I mean, one of the good things about our education system is that, certainly in my experience anyway, getting kids interested in issues. So I can remember, at primary school, talking about things like apartheid and thinking, that is unbelievably unfair. How could that be the case? And then in secondary school, probably, I think it was social studies theme, social change, about women in New Zealand society. That got me really motivated.
So you were politicised by left-wing feminist teachers?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Certainly they helped.
Yeah.
My sixth form history teacher was probably the reason that I ended up going to university. It wasn't actually on my agenda. And my mother's a teacher, but certainly I was intending to have left school and didn't get a job, so I was required to go back to school. But certainly university wasn't something that people did in my family. And I had this very, very progressive history teacher who said, "You're a bright girl, Carol, and you've got opinions, and you should go to university."
So you went into history at university?
I did do history. I did geography.
Where?
At Waikato University.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so you've got a BA in geography.
Bachelor of Social Sciences and Geography, and did economics and history and...
Has that helped?
Demography. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that degree certainly gave me an opportunity to develop some of my thinking, and still, I can recall things that occurred to me at that time, but also student politics.
Oh, of course. Okay.
Because I certainly got...
student unions are breeding grounds for Labour politicians, aren't they?
Maybe. There's quite a few of us in our caucus that have had some association with student associations.
Chris Trotter wrote this column this week about VSM essentially saying that National and ACT want to smash the unions because they're the breeding grounds for their opposition, which I think is probably correct. What do you think?
Well, as I say, that's quite possible. I think that there are a number of us that got probably very politicised and involved in thinking about issues through student associations. My first paid job actually was with, my first full-time paid job was as a research officer with what was then the New Zealand University Students Association. So I got involved in the campus women's group, I got involved with student politics, and continued from there, really. Okay, so
I still wonder with this VSM thing, we were talking about it quite a bit yesterday with the participant then, Heather Roy, and of course, regardless of how you feel about the going to VSM, do you think the student associations will survive?
I think it'll be really hard, and I think that's one of the real worries about this, that certainly the Australian evidence, and I happened to be on the Education Select Committee at one point when they were talking about some of the Australian evidence about where they've gone to voluntary student associations, and in fact they haven't survived well. And I think that's a real shame, because I actually think that it is a fundamental part of the experience of tertiary education, is those opportunities to join together with other students, those structured opportunities to debate politics, to get involved in different issues, and it's got such a long history. And I think for many people, and I don't think it's just me, for many people it's been part of their university experience.
I agree with you, but I sort of wonder if the student associations aren't their own worst enemy, and they haven't actually been good enough to actually set themselves up for the next stage. And so, because there's been so much mismanagement of them, because there's been so sort of anti-democratic parts of them, that they just don't have the reputation or the stage to be survive as voluntary.
What sort of mismanagement do you mean? I mean, I don't recall hearing lots of examples of mismanagement of student association. I mean, I've heard one or two, Well,
there's the occasional fraud sort of stories and so forth.
I've heard one or two of those.
I think as students we've all seen examples of student associations doing some pretty silly things. But I mean, that's subjective,
doing a
isn't
lot
it?
of really good things
Oh,
as
absolutely.
well. A lot of really good things.
Absolutely. But okay, so you think it's touch and go about whether they'll survive?
I really sincerely hope they do, and that they find a way to do that. But the problem is that it is one of those things that if people think that they can get that support without contributing to it, then possibly a lot of them won't. And then the actual services will decline, and so therefore less effective, and so therefore people won't. So it becomes a spiral down.
Sure.
I think.
So it'll be unfortunate. Okay. Any other views on the VSM issue for Carol from the audience, from the tourist sphere?
Not much going on in the tourist sphere. There's a question before about women's issues, which I'm sure you'll talk about at some point.
Oh no, let's talk about it now. What's the question?
Well, it was from Claire actually, about what the differing opinions between the National Party and the Labour Party on women's affairs.
Is that what you call a Patsy question?
Yeah.
Okay, here's your Patsy question.
Fantastic. Well, I'm Labour's Women's Affairs spokesperson, and this week, because Monday was Suffrage Day, we launched our women's policy, so it is a very topical issue. And I have to say, I'm really proud of the policy we have launched. And I think this is one of those areas where there's quite clear distinction between the two parties. So if you think about what the government says their achievements for women are, they say cutting taxes and police safety orders. That's literally it. Okay. And that was both the Minister and the Acting Minister when I asked that question. That doesn't seem that significant. In the same time, they've really undermined the processes around pay and employment equity. They've cut funding in a whole number of areas around violence against women. Their main focus at the moment appears to be around women on corporate boards. Important, but probably not the big ticket item for a lot of New Zealand women. So I think there's really big gaps. Things like the training incentive allowance for those on the domestic purposes benefit. That is probably one of the shoddiest changes, which does have a really big impact on women. Women who are actually trying to get ahead for themselves and their kids. And the Minister who of course cut it was a woman who used the training incentive allowance herself, which just to me smacks of all sorts of hypocrisy really. But anyway, our policy will have the big areas in it are around pay equity and employment equity, around violence against women, and I'm trying to actually get that particular issue moved out of the political toing and froing actually, and say, look, this is an issue that everybody agrees is a problem. The evidence is all there. Our country is one of the worst in the OECD in this regard. Let's agree a long-term strategy and let's get cross-party support.
So these all sound like progressive ideas. Why didn't the last Helen Clark Labour government make any progress on any of them?
Well, we actually did a lot of those things. Labour has tried twice now around pay equity. So in
1989?
Just before National came in, 89, was the pay equity bill. It was literally one of the first things that National got rid of when they came in. And then in the last government, we established the Pay and Employment Equity Task Force.
But you didn't bring back that same legislation from 89?
No, because the difference was that in between times, in the decade between, the mechanism that you would have needed had been smashed, and that was the award system. So the previous pay equity bill required the award system to actually to change pay rates. That was smashed. We brought in a task force. We then set up the Pay and Employment Equity Unit in the Department of Labour and has set up a whole lot of audit processes that a lot of groups...
Sounded all a bit sort of too little too late, sort of, though.
Well,
Wasn't
it was definitely as a consequence of having a much more decentralised industrial relations framework. The solutions are not as obvious, but things like lifting the minimum wage, which Labor did substantially during that last term, also help with pay equity because women are concentrated, so about 60% of those on the minimum wage are women. You lift the minimum wage, you start to help squeeze the pay gap.
So what's a fair minimum wage, do you think, now?
Well, we've committed to lifting the minimum wage by $2 an hour to $15 an hour as one of our first actions.
Okay, but is that really fair? I mean, it's pretty low, 15.
It's still pretty low, and I mean many would like to see that higher.
How could you survive on $15 an hour?
Well, I couldn't.
I couldn't.
No.
But
certainly it will make a big difference. An extra $2 an hour will make a difference, and combined with some of the other things we're doing around lifting income. So we're saying that everybody would have the first $5,000 of their income tax-free. We are looking at taking GST off fruit and vegetables. Some of those things combined for a 2 low-income family, we're predicting will make a difference of about $100 a week.
Okay, Albert's got a question at the front.
I've got another horrible broad question, sorry. When this is like the $15, raising it to $15 is one thing, but when by the time that we'll get to our mid-20s, like the gap between men and women in New Zealand it gets huge. With throughout our professional careers. What is realistically what else do you think can Labor do just to minimise that gap between male and female earnings in New Zealand?
Well, I think we can do quite a lot, and certainly the policy we've announced is probably actually the strongest policy we have had in this regard because we are serious about dealing with this issue. It's been an ongoing one for a very long time. The 72 Equal Pay Act did make quite a big difference at that point. Like there was quite a big shift, and after that, it's been some incremental change, and then we've sort of been hovering around this 12-13% for a while. We need to do something about it, and you just referred to in our professional life, there was a report just in the last week or so that was put up on the Ministry of Education website, and it shows absolutely new graduates. So none of the stuff about taking time out of work and looking after kids, none of these other factors that are always brought into play. The gender pay gap happens quite quickly between men and women from graduation onwards. So what we're saying is that there's a commitment to equal pay, that we're going to put in place legislation that will put a positive duty to provide equality in the workplace. That's the new bit, really. That's the seriously new bit. And the third piece is around actually having a mechanism whereby you can compare different jobs and do an equal value case. Then you need to have the mechanism by which you actually put that into place. And so then we haven't announced our work and wages policy area yet, but we will be looking at some changes in there around trying to strengthen collective bargaining, because a decentralised system, the gap increases.
Okay, does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, it's very hard to stop.
Okay. Nikki's got a question.